Homeless black boy shouted, "Don't drink it." Billionaire couldn't believe the truth. In the heart of the bustling city, the most luxurious restaurant glowed with golden chandeliers, soft music, and the clinking of fine cutlery. Every table was filled with men and women dressed in glittering clothes, their laughter filling the air as servants moved swiftly, carrying silver trays. At the center, seated with commanding presence, was Donovan Hale, a billionaire known for his wealth, power, and untouchable influence. Tonight was supposed to be another night of celebration, another reminder of his success as he raised a crystal glass filled with sparkling champagne. Just as the rim touched his lips, the heavy doors slammed open with a loud thud, startling everyone. A boy, no older than 13, ragged and barefoot, stumbled inside. His hair was unkempt, his clothes torn, and his eyes wide with desperation. Before the guards could react, he shouted at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing across the lavish room. "Don't drink it!" The restaurant fell into stunned silence. Forks froze mid-air. Conversations stopped, and all eyes turned toward the child who dared interrupt the most powerful man in the room. Some guests gasped in horror. Others chuckled in disbelief, while a few sneered at the sight of a homeless boy standing among the elite. One woman muttered, "Disgusting. He shouldn't even be allowed near this place." Another guest barked angrily, "Throw him out before he ruins the evening." But Donovan did not move. He lowered his glass and studied the trembling child carefully. There was something in the boy's voice, fear, urgency, truth, that made him pause. "Why shouldn't I drink this?" Donovan asked, his calm voice slicing through the tension. The boy, his voice cracking, explained that he had been wandering near the kitchen, looking for scraps of food, when he saw a man pour something into the glasses meant for Donovan's table. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it was dangerous. The guests erupted with laughter, mocking the boy's words. "A homeless child trying to play the hero? How pathetic," someone scoffed. "He's just looking for attention," another said. The waiters exchanged uncomfortable glances, while the guards moved closer, ready to drag him out. But Donovan raised his hand, stopping them. His eyes never left the boy's face. Unlike everyone else, he noticed the boy wasn't asking for money or pity. He wasn't even afraid of being humiliated or beaten. He only wanted Donovan to put the glass down. Something about that selflessness struck him deeply. Donovan turned to the manager and ordered the champagne to be tested immediately. The staff hesitated, embarrassed by the disruption, but they obeyed. The results returned quickly, and the truth hit like a storm. There was poison in the glass, enough to kill him within minutes. Gasps filled the room as faces turned pale. The guests who mocked the boy now avoided his eyes, shame burning on their cheeks. Donovan stood slowly, his voice steady but heavy with realization. This boy just saved my life. The lavish restaurant glittered under chandeliers as music played and conversations flowed among the city's wealthiest elites. Donovan Hale, the billionaire at the center of it all, was about to raise his glass when the doors burst open and a ragged boy shouted, "Don't drink it!" The room froze. All eyes turned toward the child, barefoot and trembling in his torn clothes, his voice echoing with desperation. Guests exchanged looks of disbelief, their polished smiles twisting into scornful sneers. A woman, draped in diamonds, hissed, "How did he even get in here?" While a man in a tailored suit snapped, "Throw him out at once!" The guards moved forward, but Donovan lifted a hand, his sharp gaze silencing the entire hall. He did not dismiss the boy the way others did. Instead, his deep voice cut through the whispers as he asked, "Why shouldn't I drink this?" The boy froze under the weight of 100 eyes, his thin chest heaving as he struggled to speak. His words tumbled out in a trembling rush, explaining how he had been lingering near the kitchen hoping for scraps when he saw a man deliberately tampering with the drinks meant for Donovan's table. His tone was filled with fear, not greed, and his eyes carried the heavy weight of truth. Yet the room erupted in laughter, cruel and mocking. "The imagination of a beggar," someone sneered, lifting their own glass with mock ceremony. "He's only trying to cause a scene for attention," another scoffed, rolling his eyes as though the boy's warning were nothing more than a child's fantasy. Even the waitstaff shifted uncomfortably, some embarrassed, others annoyed at the disruption. To the wealthy guests, this boy was nothing but a stain on their perfect evening, a reminder of a world they chose to ignore. But Donovan did not laugh. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving the boy. He noticed something that others failed to see. The boy's words were not spoken with the desperation of someone begging for money or pity. He hadn't asked for food, coins, or shelter. He hadn't flinched under the insults or the threat of being dragged away. All he wanted was for Donovan to stop, to put down the glass, to believe him. It wasn't greed or gain that drove his warning. It was urgency, as though the boy's own life depended on saving Donovan's. The air grew thick with tension as Donovan's fingers tapped the stem of the untouched glass. The laughter around him faded into background noise as he weighed the boy's trembling honesty against the cold dismissiveness of the crowd. For a moment, it felt as if only two people existed in the room: the billionaire with the poisoned glass and the homeless child who dared to speak the truth. The manager hesitated as Donovan's voice carried across the silent restaurant, commanding that the champagne be tested immediately. The room, moments ago full of laughter and chatter, now held its breath. The waitstaff shifted nervously, clearly embarrassed by the disruption, but none dared disobey the billionaire. A waiter carefully carried the crystal glass away while eyes followed every movement. The boy stood frozen near the door, his thin arms wrapped tightly around his chest, his lips trembling as though he feared no one would believe him. Some guests whispered mockingly, shaking their heads at the absurdity, while others smirked, confident the boy's warning would be exposed as a lie. But Donovan's gaze never wavered, sharp and unwavering, focused on the truth that lingered in the boy's frightened eyes. Minutes felt like hours as tension coiled through the lavish dining hall. The sound of footsteps returning from the kitchen finally broke the stillness. The waiter's face had drained of color, his hands trembling as he carried a slip of paper and spoke in a hushed tone to the manager. A wave of unease swept through the guests as the manager's expression hardened, his jaw tightening before he lifted his eyes toward Donovan. "Sir," he said, his voice shaking despite his attempt at composure, "the drink, it's been poisoned." The words struck like lightning. Gasps erupted, echoing off the marble walls. A woman clutched her pearls, nearly fainting, while another man pushed his chair back in horror. All the arrogance, the sneers, the cruel laughter directed at the homeless child dissolved into silence. The poison, enough to end Donovan's life within minutes, had been swirling casually in the glass he almost drank. A cold shiver passed through the billionaire as he looked at the untouched drink, realizing how close death had been. Slowly, his eyes shifted toward the boy, who still stood trembling, unsure if anyone would believe he had saved the man's life. Donovan rose from his seat, his face pale but his voice steady, carrying the weight of gratitude and shock. "This child," he declared, pointing toward the boy who had been mocked and nearly thrown out, "just saved my life." The restaurant erupted into stunned silence. Those who had laughed earlier now turned their faces away, guilt searing their pride. No one could meet the boy's gaze. The child who moments ago was seen as worthless, an intruder unworthy of their presence, now stood revealed as the only reason the most powerful man in the room still breathed. Donovan stepped forward, his polished shoes echoing against the marble, and stood before the boy. The room, filled with millionaires and socialites, seemed to shrink until there were only two figures that mattered: the billionaire who had nearly been killed, and the homeless child whose courage had stopped it. Donovan's expression softened. As he placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room even further. "You saved me," he said simply, and in those 3 words, the entire balance of power in the room shifted forever. The police arrived quickly, their flashing lights painting the restaurant walls in red and blue as uniformed officers rushed in. Guests whispered nervously, some still shaken by the revelation that a life-threatening crime had nearly unfolded before their eyes. The manager explained everything, his voice trembling as he handed over the poisoned glass. Within minutes, the culprit was caught, a disgruntled ex-employee who had slipped into the kitchen unnoticed. Shackled in handcuffs, he shouted bitterly as the police dragged him away, but no one listened. All eyes were fixed on the boy who had stopped the disaster. He stood awkwardly near the entrance, his small frame dwarfed by the opulence around him, his eyes darting nervously as though he might still be thrown out despite saving the billionaire's life. Donovan Hale, however, could not look away from the boy. In the chaos of police questioning, the billionaire's attention remained, firmly anchored to the child. Something stirred deep within him, something he had not felt in years. He walked across the polished floor, his expensive shoes clicking softly against the marble, and crouched slightly so his eyes met the boy's. His voice, gentle yet powerful, broke the silence that gripped the hall. "What's your name, son?" he asked. The boy hesitated, unused to kindness, before whispering, "Marcus." The sound of his own name seemed to surprise him, as though he hadn't spoken it in a long time. Donovan's eyes softened, and for a moment the billionaire who was feared and respected by many looked like an ordinary man touched by genuine gratitude. The crowd waited, breathless, expecting Donovan to dismiss the child with a token reward, perhaps money or a pat on the back. Instead, he did something that left every guest speechless. He reached for Marcus's hand and held it firmly, then turned toward the stunned audience. His voice carried across the hall, steady and unwavering, each word slicing through the air with purpose. "From this day forward, Marcus will never be homeless again. He will have a roof over his head, food to eat, an education to shape his mind, and every chance at a future." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The same people who had sneered and mocked just minutes before now stared in silent awe. Some lowered, their eyes in shame, unable to bear the weight of their earlier cruelty. Tears welled in Marcus's eyes as he looked up at Donovan, unsure if he was dreaming. For so long, he had been invisible to the world, just another face among the forgotten, dismissed without a second glance. Yet here he was, standing hand in hand with one of the most powerful men in the city, his life forever changed by a single moment of courage. Donovan tightened his grip, signaling that his promise was not empty words but a vow sealed in front of all who witnessed it. The boy who entered the restaurant as an outcast now left it as a hero, his destiny rewritten. In the span of one unforgettable night,